Early life and military career. Netanyahu was born in 1949 in Tel Aviv. His mother, Silas Siegel, 1912–2000, was born in Petah Tikva in the Ottoman Empire's Mutasarrafate of Jerusalem, and his father, Warsaw-born Ben-Zion Netanyahu, mileikowsky, 1910–2012, was a historian specializing in the Jewish Golden Age of Spain. Netanyahu's paternal grandfather, Nathan Mileikowsky, was a rabbi and Zionist writer. When Netanyahu's father emigrated to Israel, he Hebraized his surname from Mileikowsky to Netanyahu, meaning God has given. While his family is predominantly Ashkenazi, he is said that a DNA test revealed him to have some Sephardic ancestry. He claims descent from the Vilna. Netanyahu was the second of 3 children. He was initially raised and educated in Jerusalem, where he attended Henrietta Zold Elementary School. A copy of his evaluation from his 6th grade teacher Ruth Rubenstein indicated that Netanyahu was courteous, polite, and helpful, that he was responsible and punctual, and that he was friendly, disciplined, cheerful, brave, active, and obedient. Between 1956 and 1958, and again from 1963 to 1967, his family lived in the United States in Cheltenham Township, Pennsylvania, a suburb of Philadelphia, while father Ben-Zion Netanyahu taught at Dropsy College. Benjamin attended and graduated from Cheltenham High School and was active in the debate club, chess club, and soccer. He and his brother Yonatan grew dissatisfied with what they saw as the superficial way of life they encountered in the area, including the prevalent youth counterculture movement and the liberal sensibilities of the Reform Synagogue, Temple Judea of Philadelphia, that the family attended. Mileikowsky etymology.
From Russian, mileikowsky, from Mileikov, Russian transliteration of Mileiko, a village in Poland.
Proper noun. Mileikowsky. A transliteration of the Russian surname Mileikowsky. Family and background. Though all his grandparents were born in the Russian Empire, now Belarus, Lithuania, and Poland, his mother's parents emigrated to Minneapolis in the United States. The Zionist agenda is in the family's tradition. Regarding the Palestinian people, he stated that they won't be able to face, anymore, the war with U.S., which will include withholding food from Arab cities, preventing education, terminating electrical power and more. They won't be able to exist, and they will run away from here. But it all depends on the war, and whether we will win the battles with them. Netanyahu's paternal grandfather was Nathan Mileikowsky, a leading Zionist rabbi and JNF fundraiser. Education. Netanyahu returned to the United States in late 1972 to study architecture at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. After briefly returning to Israel to fight in the Yom Kippur War, he returned to the United States and, under the name Ben-Niti, completed a bachelor's degree. At that time he changed his name to Benjamin ben Nitai, Nitai, a reference to both Mount Nitai and to the eponymous Jewish sage Nitai of Arbela, was a pen name often used by his father for articles. Years later, in an interview with the media, Netanyahu clarified that he decided to do so to make it easier for Americans to pronounce his name. This fact has been used by his political rivals to accuse him indirectly of a lack of Israeli national identity and loyalty. Marriages and relationships. Netanyahu has been married 3 times. Netanyahu's first marriage was to Miriam Weizmann, whom he met in Israel. Weizmann lived near Yonatan Netanyahu's apartment in Jerusalem, where Netanyahu was based during his military service. By the time Netanyahu's service was finished, Weizmann had completed her own military service as well as a degree in chemistry from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. In 1972, they both left to study in the United States, where she enrolled in Brandeis University, while Netanyahu studied at MIT. They married soon afterward. The couple had 1 daughter, Noah, born April 29, 1978. In 1978, while Weizmann was pregnant, Netanyahu met a non-Jewish British student named Fleur Cates at the university library, and began an affair. His marriage ended in divorce soon afterward, when his wife Miriam discovered the affair. In 1981, Netanyahu married Cates, and she converted to Judaism. After moving with Netanyahu to Israel, Cates sued for divorce in 1988. His third wife, Sarah Ben-Artzi, was working as a flight attendant on an El Al flight from New York to Israel when they met. She was in the process of completing a master's degree in psychology. The couple married in 1991. They have 2 sons, Yair, born July 26, 1991, a former soldier in the IDF spokesperson's unit, and Avner, born October 10, 1994, a National Bible champion and winner of the National Bible Quiz for Youth in Kiryat Shmona and former soldier in the IDF Combat Intelligence Collection Corps. In 1993, Netanyahu confessed on live television to having had an affair with Ruth Bar, his public relations advisor. He said that a political rival had planted a secret video camera that had recorded him in a sexually compromising position with Bar, and that he had been threatened with the release of the tape to the press unless he quit the Likud leadership race. Netanyahu and Sarah repaired their marriage, and he was elected to the leadership of Likud. In 1996, the media reported that he had a 20-year friendship with Catherine Price Mondadori, an Italian-American woman. During the 1990s, Netanyahu criticized this media intrusion into his private life, claiming that political rivals including David Levy had hired spies to try to gather evidence of alleged affairs. Generally, the Israeli public are not interested in their politicians' private lives and would prefer they remained private. Criminal investigations and indictment. From the main article entitled, Trial of Benjamin Netanyahu. Since January 2017, Netanyahu has been investigated and questioned by Israeli police in 2 cases. Case 1000 and Case 2000. The 2 cases are connected. In Case 1000, Netanyahu is suspected of having obtained inappropriate favors from businessmen, including James Packer and Hollywood producer Arnon Milchan. Case 2000 involves alleged attempts to strike a deal with the publisher of the Yiddish Aeronaut newspaper group, Arnon Moses, to promote legislation to weaken Yiddish's main competitor, Israel Hayom, in exchange for more favorable coverage of Netanyahu. On August 3, 2017, Israeli police confirmed for the first time that Netanyahu was suspected of crimes involving fraud, breach of trust, and bribes in cases 1000 and 2000. The next day, it was reported that the Prime Minister's former Chief of Staff, Ari Haro, had signed a deal with prosecutors to testify against Netanyahu in these cases. Israelis protest against Netanyahu outside his official residence in Jerusalem on July 30, 2020. On February 13, 2018, Israeli police recommended that Netanyahu be charged with corruption. According to a police statement, sufficient evidence exists to indict the prime minister on charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in the two cases. Netanyahu responded that the allegations were baseless and that he would continue as prime minister. On November 25, 2018, it was reported that Economic Crimes Division Director Eliezer Ben-Yehuda recommended indictment for both cases. On February 28, 2019, the Israeli Attorney General announced his intent to file indictments against Netanyahu on bribe and fraud charges in 3 different cases. Netanyahu was formally indicted on November 21, 2019. If Netanyahu is convicted, he could face up to 10 years in prison for bribery and a maximum of 3 years for fraud and breach of trust. He is the first sitting prime minister in Israel's history to be charged with a crime. On November 23, 2019, it was announced that Netanyahu, in compliance with legal precedent set by the Israeli Supreme Court in 1993, would relinquish his agriculture, health, social affairs, and diaspora affairs portfolios. The matter of forcing a prime minister to resign due to an indictment has yet to be tested in court. He was officially charged on January 28, 2020. Netanyahu's criminal trial was set to begin on May 24, 2020, having been initially scheduled for March of that year, but delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As of April 2023, the criminal trial is still ongoing. 2023 update. Are Netanyahu's legal troubles behind push for judicial change? The judiciary has proven to be a problem for the Israeli PM, who is on trial on corruption and fraud charges. Israel's longest-serving prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has succeeded in passing the first part of a judicial overhaul through the Knesset as he is on trial on corruption, fraud and breach of trust charges. As of July 24, 2023, Israel has been mired in months of protests and political uncertainty over Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's plans to overhaul the judicial system. Heading the most far-right government in Israel's history, Netanyahu has been accused of using the legislation to try to circumvent his own legal problems. The Knesset passed the bill on Monday, but it is just one element of a wider effort to overhaul the judiciary, and one that many in the opposition suspect could be partly brought on by Netanyahu's legal troubles. Here is all you need to know. What cases has Netanyahu been fighting in court? In 2019, Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit filed criminal charges against Netanyahu in 3 investigations known as Cases 1000, 2000 and 4000. In Case 1000, Netanyahu and his wife, Sarah, are accused of receiving gifts, including champagne and cigars, from prominent Hollywood producer Arnon Milchan and Australian billionaire businessman James Packer in return for political favors. Case 2000 centers on accusations that Netanyahu negotiated a deal with Israel's best-selling daily newspaper, Yiddish Aronoff, for favorable coverage in exchange for legislative actions against a rival newspaper. In Case 4000, Netanyahu is accused of granting regulatory favors to a telecommunications company, Bezek Telecom Israel, in return for positive media coverage on a news website controlled by the company's former chairman. The trial got underway in May 2020 and has been repeatedly delayed over defense and prosecution disputes and the COVID-19 pandemic. Netanyahu is charged with fraud, breach of trust and corruption. He has pleaded not guilty and says he is the victim of a politically orchestrated witch hunt by the media and the left to remove him from office.
We begin in Israel, where hundreds of thousands of people have rallied against the government's plans to change the judiciary. They want Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to scrap his campaign to curtail some of the Supreme Court's powers. The Knesset is due to vote on the proposed government bill on Monday. About 10,000 military reservists say they're suspending voluntary service in opposition to the policy.
I'm here because the extremists are trying to change our regime. They got into power and they are trying to make us a weak democracy.
I came here to protest everything that is happening in the state of Israel. I think the situation requires all of us to stand up. Democracy and humanism are being eroded on a daily basis by politicians, religious figures, and leaders of communities in the country. And we need to do something about it. We need to say enough is enough.
Mohammed Jamjoom has more now from Tel Aviv.
All of the protesters that are out this evening in Tel Aviv are opposed to the very controversial plans of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to try and overhaul the judiciary of Israel. This is the 29th week of protests. There is a massive amount of people here already, and it's expected the numbers will only grow. And this is not the only demonstration that's taken place today. There have been at least 12 other demonstrations throughout the country, including tens of thousands of people that were marching from Tel Aviv, making their way to the Knesset in West Jerusalem, where they will demonstrate against the debate that is scheduled to start Sunday on the potential passage of a very controversial bill that would see, critics say, the oversight powers of the Supreme Court weakened substantially if it were to pass. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu says he is committed to continue with these plans, and that once this bill passes, he will then step back and try to seek compromise with opposition parties. But that's not good enough for the thousands upon thousands of people that are out across Israel who say that this is a real threat to democracy, and that if these plans are put in place, they will take Israel away from democracy and put it on a road to autocracy. Mohammed Jamjoom, Al Jazeera, Tel Aviv.
Has Netanyahu been accused of using the judicial changes to save himself? The bill passed on Monday limits the Supreme Court's powers to check the government but does not appear to impact the cases against Netanyahu. The Prime Minister's opponents worry that this is only the beginning and argue that any changes to the powers of the judiciary might help him evade conviction or even make the cases against him disappear altogether. One proposed reform would allow the government to appoint more members to a committee that oversees appointees to the Supreme Court, giving Netanyahu the power to pack the court with more friendly judges. Benny Gantz's opposition Blue and White Alliance previously raised concerns that whether or not the charges prove to be true or without merit, Netanyahu will continue to act in accordance with his own political and personal interests. What does the government say? While critics say the judicial changes are a power grab that would push Israel towards autocracy, Netanyahu has defended them and dismissed the protests, stating that his aim is to restore a proper balance between the three branches of government. Should the government succeed in its plans, some former officials such as one-time Interior and Health Minister Aryeh Deri could be reinstated by the Prime Minister despite criminal convictions. Netanyahu was forced to dismiss the minister at the beginning of the year after the Supreme Court ruled that Deri's tax fraud conviction prohibited him from holding a ministerial position. The most far-right Israeli government? After his stunning success in the 2022 elections, Netanyahu formed a coalition with several far-right parties: Jewish Power, led by Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Religious Zionist Party, led by Bezalel Smotrich, and the anti-LGBTQ party Noam. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have a long history of using incendiary rhetoric against Palestinians. They oppose Palestinian statehood and support extending Israeli control over the occupied West Bank. Critics say that the government's policies in the occupied West Bank could cause a security escalation there. The territory is experiencing its worst violence for nearly 20 years. Many Palestinians say the Israeli opposition ignores its own role in continuing the illegal occupation of Palestinian lands, which has continued under governments headed by all the leading Israeli parties.
Prime Minister appeared to choke up, defending himself against charges he says were cooked up by his enemies. They're spilling my wife's blood. They're persecuting my sons. They brought my family through the 7 circles of hell, he said. Just hours earlier, the Attorney General announced he plans to indict Netanyahu for fraud, bribery, and breach of trust. Police accused Netanyahu of accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars in gifts, including cigars, champagne, jewelry, and flattering media coverage in exchange for backing legislation to help wealthy businessmen. President Trump, an ardent supporter, defended Netanyahu.
That I can say this, that he's done a great job as prime minister. He's tough, he's smart, he's strong.
But how strong will now be tested with elections in just 40 days.
If the case goes ahead, Netanyahu would be the first sitting Israeli prime minister to be indicted.